This happened in late 2023, just before winter break. I was about 15 years old at the time when my friend Tara invited 3 of us to her place for a weekend sleepover. She lived roughly 30 minutes outside the city, in a quiet area with only a handful of houses spaced far apart. Her backyard opened up to a wide field that stretched out to a line of woods. It was the kind of neighborhood where people didn't usually lock their doors, or so I thought. Tara's parents were away that weekend. They'd left early Saturday morning for a short trip and were expected back Sunday evening. They knew us all well and trusted Tara. I had been to her house before, and it had always felt completely safe. That afternoon was typical. We watched a movie, played cards, and made a mess in the kitchen trying to bake brownies. Once it got dark, we were all getting tired, so we changed into pajamas, grabbed snacks and blankets, and settled into the living room. Around 10:30 p.m., we were halfway through a scary movie when the motion light outside flicked on. The living room window looked out onto the driveway, and the sudden light caught my eye. I glanced outside but didn't see anything. I figured it was a raccoon or maybe a neighbor's cat passing through. Tara's dog was upstairs in her room and didn't bark or seem bothered. About 10 minutes later, the light came on again. This time, everyone noticed. We laughed it off, joking about ghosts, then turned back to the movie. But when it happened a third time, the light stayed on longer. I didn't say anything, but something about it felt different, like something had triggered it and was just standing there. Tara got up and locked the front door, even though it was already closed. I started to feel uneasy but kept it to myself. Then about 15 minutes later, the light turned on once more. We didn't wait this time. We paused the movie and all went to the window. The light was still shining. At first, everything looked the same. Then Isabella pointed toward the edge of the property. Near the tree line, just beyond the driveway, someone was crouching. It wasn't immediately obvious. The figure was low to the ground, partly hidden behind a large tree. But once we saw it, we couldn't unsee it. I tried to convince myself it was just a shadow or something explainable, but the shape didn't move. Tara quietly said we should call the police and went upstairs to get her phone. She came back down a few minutes later and told us an officer was on the way. They told her not to open any doors and to stay inside. About 20 minutes later, we saw red and blue lights coming up the driveway. 2 officers got out and started checking the yard with flashlights. We stayed by the window, watching as they walked the property and eventually disappeared around the side of the house. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. One of the officers said they hadn't found anyone. He asked a few questions, how long the person had been there, what they looked like, but none of us had gotten a clear look. He said it was probably someone passing through, maybe walking along the road. They wrote down Tara's name and told us to call again if anything else happened. After they left, we locked the door again and checked every window. The motion light didn't come on anymore. We didn't bother turning the movie back on. None of us felt like it. We just sat together for a while in silence. Eventually, we decided to bring our sleeping bags upstairs. We had planned to sleep in the living room, but being higher up with the dog nearby felt safer. In the morning, we came downstairs, still tired but trying to act like everything was normal. Tara started making toast while I stood by the window, looking out toward the driveway. That's when I noticed something. Near the back door, in a patch of damp dirt, there were footprints. Not many, just a few, but they were fresh. You could clearly see the tread of boots, all pointing toward the house. The mud hadn't dried yet, meaning they had been made recently. I told the others, and we all went to look. One of the prints was right up against the back door. Someone had been standing there, maybe even trying the handle. Tara said it had been locked, and we double-checked to make sure it still was. Thankfully, it hadn't been opened. But the fact that someone had gotten that close, even after the police had already come and gone, made everything feel worse. Her parents got home later that day. Tara's dad took a walk around the yard and said it was probably just someone wandering through, but he still changed the locks on both doors that night and put a camera on the porch. We didn't talk much about it after that. None of us wanted to turn it into a bigger thing than it already felt. But I didn't go back to Tara's house for a long time. And we never did figure out who that person was, or why they stayed hidden behind that tree for so long. This happened back in 2022 when I was 13. It was a Friday night at the beginning of summer, and I was staying over at my friend Jordan's house. There were 4 of us that night: me, Jordan, Tyler, and William. We lived in a quiet town where not much ever went on. We were hanging out in the living room, half watching a scary movie and eating snacks, when Tyler brought up the house next door, the one everyone said was abandoned. It had been empty for years, but some kids claimed they'd seen lights on inside at night. Nobody ever proved it, though. Most people just made up random stories. Tyler suggested we check it out. We laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't. He dared us to go in, calling us cowards if we didn't. Of course, none of us wanted to be the one to back out. We waited until Jordan's mom went to sleep, then grabbed a flashlight and slipped out through the back door. The flashlight lit our path as we stepped inside. We moved slowly down the hallway, passing dusty floors and empty rooms. At the end of the hall, we found a staircase leading up. At the top, there was a narrow hallway with 3 closed doors, 2 on the left and 1 on the right. We opened the first door on the left. It was completely empty. The second one was jammed and wouldn't budge, so we tried the door on the right. Tyler opened it. Inside was a small bedroom, surprisingly clean compared to the rest of the house. The walls were bare, but in the room there was a table, a wooden chair, and something scattered on the floor. We stepped in and swept the flashlight across the space. That's when we saw them, photographs. Dozens of them, spread out all over the floor. They were pictures of us. Some taken at school, some from our neighborhood, even a few that looked like they were taken inside our own homes. On the table was a map, and it had our names written in different spots. There were notes too, lists showing when we left for school, who we walked with, what we were wearing. It was like someone had been tracking us for a while. Jordan grabbed the map, folded it, and shoved it into the pocket of his hoodie. Then, in the corner of the room, we noticed a camcorder. It was on. A small red light was blinking, it was recording. Jordan quietly said we needed to leave. We backed out of the room, walked quickly down the stairs, back through the hallway, and out the door into the yard. We didn't stop until we were back inside Jordan's house, locking the door behind us. Jordan placed the folded map on the table, and we all stood around it, staring. It had all our names, schedules, the routes we took to school, everything. William told Jordan to call the police. Jordan didn't hesitate. He picked up the landline and made the call. The officer on the phone asked a few questions and said they'd send someone over. About 15 minutes later, 2 officers showed up. We let them in and showed them the map. We explained everything we saw in that upstairs room. They took the map and told us to stay inside while they checked the house next door. It took them about 20 minutes. When they came back, they said the house was empty. Jordan asked if they found the pictures or the camera. One of the officers said they hadn't seen any photos at all. They found the table and the chair, but nothing else. The photos and the camera were gone. It didn't make sense. We had seen the pictures scattered everywhere. The camera was still running when we left. Now, there was no sign of any of it. One of the officers said that without any solid evidence, there wasn't much they could do. The map by itself wasn't enough. We stayed in the living room the rest of the night. None of us felt like sleeping. We barely talked. We just waited for the sun to rise. When it finally got light outside, we started packing up to go home. Before we left, I looked out the window at the house next door. It looked just like it always had. But after what we saw that night, none of us ever went near it again. This happened 2 years ago when I was 16. My best friend Ryan had invited 3 of us to spend the weekend at his house while his parents were out of town. His family lived just a few blocks from me in a peaceful neighborhood. It was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until dusk and porch lights were left on more out of routine than worry. Ryan's house was older but well maintained. There was a large front yard with hedges lining the driveway. The living room, where we planned to crash, had a big window that looked straight out onto the yard and street. We rolled out our sleeping bags, played video games, and talked about anything and everything. Around midnight, things started to quiet down. We turned off the game console and just sat around chatting. That's when I got the idea. It would be funny to sneak outside, tap on the window, and scare the guys. I quietly put on my shoes, unlocked the back door, and slipped out into the night. Keeping low and silent, I crept along the hedge line toward the front yard. The plan was easy: sneak up, tap the window just enough to spook them, then duck out of sight. But as I rounded the corner and crouched behind a bush, I froze. Someone was already there, standing in front of the living room window. They were about 10 feet away from me, motionless and facing the glass. At first, I thought maybe one of the guys had seen me leave and was trying to flip the scare on me. But it wasn't Ryan or anyone else I recognized. The figure was taller, with broader shoulders, and dressed in dark clothing. I couldn't make out the face, just the outline. He wasn't knocking or making any noise, just standing completely still, watching. My mind was spinning. If I moved, he might notice. If I stayed, I had no idea what would happen next. What started as a joke had suddenly turned into something much darker, something that didn't feel right. And the worst part? The others inside had no clue what was going on. I knew staying put wasn't an option if he moved closer. I slowly backed away along the hedge, staying low, until I reached the side of the house. From there, I moved faster, crossing the backyard until I reached the back door. I slipped inside, locked it behind me, and headed into the living room. The lights were still on, and the others were sprawled on their sleeping bags, still facing the TV. I walked over to Ryan and grabbed his arm, pointing silently at the window. Ryan stood up, turned off the television, and peeked through the curtain. When he didn't see anything, he assumed I was messing with them and brushed it off. We pulled our sleeping bags closer together, forming a cluster in the center of the room. Around 3 a.m., I heard something, a soft thud from the side of the house. I stayed still and listened. A few seconds later, there was a faint scraping noise, like something brushing along the wall. Ryan sat up and looked at me. I could tell from his face that he'd heard it too. I stood and made my way toward the back, staying low. I checked the back door. Still locked. I waited there in the dark, listening. For a long time, there was nothing. But I couldn't stop thinking about the man from earlier. I remembered that the side gate had a loose latch, someone could easily push it open with enough force. I headed back to the living room and signaled to the others to keep quiet. Without saying anything, I picked up Ryan's phone from the floor, unlocked it, and called for help. I whispered enough into the phone to explain what was going on. It felt like forever, but finally, headlights lit up the front of the house. A police car had arrived. One officer got out, scanning the yard with a flashlight. Just then, we heard another loud thump from the side of the house. The officer reacted immediately, and we heard some muffled yelling, followed by the sound of someone running. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. It was the officer. He came in and explained what had happened. They had caught a man trying to get through the side gate. He wasn't armed, but he had a crowbar and a pair of gloves on him. He claimed he was just looking for somewhere to sleep, but the officer said it seemed more likely he was trying to break in after noticing a house full of teens alone for the night. They had found footprints in the yard, ones that led from the sidewalk to the front window and around the side of the house. The person I saw earlier wasn't just passing by, he had stuck around, waiting for a chance. The police took him into custody, and one officer stayed outside until Ryan's parents got home early the next morning. By daylight, the house felt normal again. The living room was just a typical sleepover mess, snack wrappers, tangled blankets, but everything felt different. We had come far too close to something we hadn't seen coming. I got home from work close to midnight, almost 1 a.m. I've been working night shifts for the last 3 years, so late nights are normal for me. My neighborhood is usually very quiet by then. I live in a small, calm area with lined-up houses and lots of families. After 10 p.m., the streets are empty, and most of the houses are dark. In all the time I've lived there, I've only seen someone walking around that late maybe 4 or 5 times. So when I spotted a person on the sidewalk that night, it immediately felt off. They were moving slowly, not really headed anywhere, which made it seem even stranger. I was still sitting in my parked car outside my house, chatting with my boyfriend on the phone before going inside. I wasn't really thinking about anything, just unwinding. Then, out of habit, I glanced at my side mirror. That's when I noticed them. I saw legs moving as the person walked, and there was a bright light with them. At first, I assumed it was a phone flashlight, but it was far too intense, more like a small spotlight. As soon as the person reached the sidewalk across from my car, they stopped walking. Then, very slowly, the light began to lift. It didn't wobble or shake like someone casually holding a flashlight. It rose smoothly, as if it was being aimed carefully, until it was pointing directly at my side mirror. The beam hit just right, reflecting straight into my eyes. I was still on the call, but my hand went down to grab my car keys. I was shaking so much I dropped them once, then had to fumble blindly around the seat to find them. The whole time, I kept telling myself, "Don't look up." I don't know why, but I had this horrible feeling that if I looked again, the person would be standing right outside my window. Eventually, I found the keys. I started the engine and drove away from the neighborhood. As I turned the corner, the light finally disappeared from view. I tried explaining everything over the phone, but I was too shaken up to make sense of it. All I wanted was to get far away from that street. The direction the person had been walking led toward a large mailbox where they might have hidden, but there wasn't much else around. No cars, no fences, no trees, just a long, empty sidewalk. Even on the way to my boyfriend's place, I didn't see a single person anywhere. The idea that someone could have been hiding, staying out of sight on purpose, terrified me. I still don't know exactly what I saw that night, but the way the light was aimed directly at the mirror didn't feel random. It felt deliberate.